Hi everybody, it's Yvonne from Western Star Art and Wear. Hey, I've been thinking, been trying to come up with an idea for something to do that's different than what everyone else is doing and that kind of has something to do with country living and stuff like that. And I mean, I don't mind coming on and doing cooking and crafts or something like that, but I was wanting to do something kind of different. So I've been thinking about it a lot, and I don't know if I have any great ideas or anything, but I have this book that my dad wrote. He wrote two and a half, and I don't think he ever finished the third one. And a lot of you have shown a little bit of interest in, what it was and what it was like. And so I thought maybe I'd come on and read some of it. We'll see how it goes. If I'm not a great reader for reading out loud, so that makes me a little nervous. And I don't speak fluent Southerner, and that's how this is written, so you might have to bear with me. Anyway, I am wearing one of our necklace sets. This is a white concho stone necklace. I can put a link. It's just a little stud earring with it and adjustable back with a lobster claw clasp. Anyway, I will start this and let's see how it goes. And if you guys are interested, I can maybe try to keep going, maybe do a little bit every day. It is about it's 258 to 260 pages, something like that. So let's see how long it would take me to read it. I don't know. I mean, I've read it before myself, but not out loud. So anyway, I'm going to start it and see how it goes, and then you guys maybe give me some feedback. Okay, and the book's name is Up From the Dust, and my dad's name is Lonnie L. Clayton Sr. And he grew up as a sharecropper for the first part of his life. And I don't know if any of you guys know what a sharecropper is, but it's not a very easy life. It is maybe one step up from a slave. It was kind of like where they worked the land and paid the owner of the land and barely made ends meet. Anyway, I am just one generation away from a sharecropper. So anyway, here is the book, and I will start off and we'll see how it goes. Okay. As I recall, on the morning of a day of June, I woke up to the roosters crowing and the birds in a hollering and tearing us around trying to feed all them little birds. We always ate our breakfast under the big mulberry tree in the backyard of an old Granny Kinley plantation down on Hyco River, which was about as big as a spring branch. This morning we had eggs and sausage, which was both homemade. Since this was 1923, things were a bit different than the now. There were no refrigeration, no lights, no central heat or whatever. This morning in question was to be quite a day. My pa had a 1922 Model T, and he was going to take us on a little ride into the city to see all of the goings on. My ma had scrubbed my head until it was redder than an old turkey's head, and she had given my ears the same treatment. Yes, sir, I was a clean young'un all right. I had on a pair of breeches that was too little for me and had me all prized up in the middle. There was 9 of us, and all of them were dressed up to kill. My mom had on a hat over her club with a gully picture hairpin in it to hold on her head. Son, she says, we are really going to see the world today, which didn't mean a thing to me because I thought I had been seeing it every day. Well, sir, my pa backed the old Model T out and commenced to fire her up. Smoke was a-biling out of her, and the dog started to bark at it, and the milk cow broke her tie and chain and run off. It didn't seem to faze Pa, though he was adjusting the coils under the dash. Pretty soon she settled down to a pretty good pattern, and he cut her off. Damn me, he lowed to no one in general. She is sure purring this morning, ain't she? I don't think he expected to hear a reply. None of us gave one anyway. Anyways, everyone was running around to different places, peeing or whatever, getting ready for the trip. It started out that we were going to Greensboro, but Pa settled on Mabane instead, since it was only 25 miles from us. Well, it come time for all of us to load into the contraption. I just didn't know how it was going to be accomplished. We all stood outside of the Model T and waited for the old man to tell us what to do. All right, he says, this is how it's going to be. The big uns get in first, and the crowd so they crowded 5 of them in the first layer and 4 on the next layer. They gave the old man space to drive. I was sitting up pretty high, and it looked pretty good from where I was at. An old Model T is a strange kind of contraption. It has 3 pedals for the feet and 2 levers for the hands and a Johnson rod on the left. So if you didn't throw in your Johnson rod, it wouldn't go into high. We got all in with all forms of anticipation or whatever, some smiling and some was not so happy. We had to negotiate a field with some goalies in it. Pa made the first 2, but the last one got him. As ditches go, it wasn't much, but we had such a load that he choked her down. There we sat with all 10 of us in that T and her killed on a hump. Well, Pa says we got to unload her so as for her to get over this hump. We all piled out with all of our prized up breeches and midi blouses and Ma with her hat. A strong gust of wind blowed it off, so I run it down for her. Pa got out and commenced to crank her up with the hand crank. Since it only had a magneto on it, you had to turn like all hell and gone and make her kick off. His face was redder than fire, and he kept up the cranking. The engine made a funny sound to me while he was turning her. Sounded like hisso, hisso, hisso. Finally, it went to firing with the smoke billowing out of the hood. Pa jumped back in her, motioning for all of us to get out of the way. He fired her up just about to get to the top of the other side when he would let off of the gas and roll back in the gully. He did this a couple of times with no success at all. Sweetening, my older brother hollered him down. Pa, he says, you got to keep on gassing so as to get over the hump. Now, boy, Pa says, don't you be correcting your elders, or I just might get me a frail and whip the pure pea right out of you. Well, that'd be as it may, but you sure as hell ain't gonna get over this hole like you doing, said Sweetening. Pa sat there thinking a bit, sweat a-pouring off of him, and he was hotter than all hell and gone. Well, as I see it, says Sweetening, if you're throwing in your Johnson rod too soon and that puts her in high, then she chokes down at the top of the hump. Damn me, you might be right, says Pa, and I was surprised to hear that, 'cause Pa didn't come over easy most times. All right, says Pa, all of you get into this pushing and shoving, and I'll see what she'll do. Well, he snorted her a few times, then he shoved in on the low pedal and started up the hump. This time he just kept on pushing in on low and didn't let up or push in on the Johnson rod. She cleared the hump and come up to rest on the other side. We all had been pushing like hell and gone, so when he cleared the hump, most of us fell down and there was nothing else to push. I got dirt all over my prized up breeches, and Mom fell down and lost her hat and her club come undone. We was a mess, but we had surmounted the hill. After we got on the road, all of us mounted her again and started off down the road. The wind blowing in our faces sure made us feel good. Well, sir, Pa commenced to sing an Amazing Grace or something to that effect. He didn't know all the words, so he just sort of filled in the spaces with eyes and with my wise or something that filled in. Anyways, we went biling down the road like a turpine cat, mewing and grueling. It was one of the damnedest sights I ever came up on in my whole young life. All of them ugly youngins with their hair standing up on their heads with my ma's club done unwound. We were just as happy as if we had good sense, though. We had been going for quite a spell with the Model T started to hiss once in a while. By golly, the gas is getting low, Pa says, and we have got to get some up here at Hester's store. We top a ridge and could see that the store in the distance. Pa kicked her out of gear and pulled up on the Johnson rod, and we went coasting down, freewheeling, so to speak. Getting gas in those days was quite an ordeal in itself. We all had to get out, lift up the seat, and screw off the gas cap. The man pumped up the gas in the tank and put the hose in the T. You had to sort of watch the level of the gas and stop her at the line to tell if you had a full gallon or not. The pump held 5 gallons, so Pa got 4 gallons. It was about 12 or 13 cents a gallon, and it cost Pa about 50 cents. Well, sir, the fellow at the filling station, plus a general store, says to Pa and Ma, "You sure have a fine-looking bunch of young'uns." Pa about busted his britches with pride, and Ma was burning with shame and feeling good about herself. "We were about the ugliest bunch I ever saw, and that's a fact. We were all windblown and disheveled, a bunch of us as you might want to come up on. Our clothes were full of dust, and our hair and faces was covered with dust and whatever. However, we were all in our finest. So we get back in the old T and started off down the road. There was a railroad truck station, a shoe store, and a hot dog stand, or whatever they called it. At that time, you could have called it the 21 Club for all I knew, or the others either. Pa drove in the railroad yard and parked the old Model T. All of us jumped out looking for a place to pee, or whatever. The station master frowned on us, but it didn't do any good. We didn't get it anyway. After all was said and done, we came back to the yard. Pa says a train was coming along pretty soon, and we was all supposed to wait and see what it looked like. Pretty soon you could hear the tracks popping and going on, but you couldn't see the train. Pop says, "Hot damn, here she comes, a-bilin' down them tracks. Woo-wee, if that ain't a sight to behold. Look at that smoke a-pouring out of that stack." My hair stood up on my head, and I was so scared I peed all over myself again, and I had just been. It didn't matter. Nobody paid any attention anyway. Their eyes was all glued on the train. About that time, she let out a whoop with her whistle. It sounded to me like whoop-wee, whoop-whoop. Well, sir, if that didn't scare the living hell out of us, I don't know what will. If I could have crapped my pants, I sure would have. Pa was a-jumping up and down and frailing Ma in the back hollering, "They ain't never gonna stop her, old woman. No, sir, they ain't gonna stop her. The way she is a-bilin' down that track." I was ready to take his word for it. Anyways, the old train came to a screeching halt right in front of us and went chunk, chunk, chunk. The noise that they made, the steam escapes by the valves. Ma says, "Lord of mercy, young'uns, don't crowd that thing. Give it a chance to get its breath. Ain't no telling how long they've been running her." Pa ups and says, "By gosh, if that ain't the damnedest thing I ever seen, why look at that thing. It's a-chomping at the bit. She's a plumb tuckered out. Damn me, I don't believe they'll ever get her going again." You'll have to excuse some of the language, but it's funny. About that time, she let out a short whistle like whoop, whoop. Well, sir, Pa and all of us jumped 10 feet, and Ma's eyes were bigger than saucers. We all got back a ways, and the conductor on the train waved to the engineer. He let out a blast of steam, then the conductor hollered, "Board!" and swung up on the train. She huffed several times and spun her wheels, then started up the track. We all watched for till she was out of sight. Pa says, "Now dang me if that ain't a sight for anybody's sore eyes. Ain't that the truth, old woman?" Ma lowed that it was, and the rest of us just looked on. By then it was about the shank of the day of morning, so Pa says that he was going to get us all something to eat at the cafe. We all went over to the hot dog stand and went in. The fellow behind the counter looked us over with some kind of shock. "What can I do for you?" he asked. Well, Captain Pa says, "I want to get all my young'uns a hot dog and a bottle of pop." "Coming right up," the fellow says, and he threw back a cover, and the steam biled out of the bread or rolls or whatever they called them. He had them hot dogs in front of us before you could say doggone. Then he cracked the tops of the pop and set it in front of us. It looked like it was still boiling. Pa says that it was cold because it just came out of the ice. I took his word for it. We all had never eaten anything like a hot dog in our lives, so we sort of waited for Pa to commence so we would know how. He took his up and bit a hunk off the end and took a swallow of the drink. I took mine up and tried to do the same. Somehow or the other, I did it wrong because I poured the onions all over my front. I bit down on the hot dog, but I didn't get all the way through, so I pulled back on her and slapped the hot dog in my face with mustard and all. I sat there bewildered, not knowing what was to be my next move. Pa took one look at me and shook his head. "I be danged if you ain't the worst I ever seed." "Wipe your face," Pa said, meaning all that mustard I had on me. Well, sir, that scared the heck out of me, and I started to cry with all that stuff on my face and the tears pouring down my face. You can bet I was a sight to behold. Mom sort of came to my rescue. She wiped that crap off my face and shirt. I never did get to eat the hot dog. I was too upset by then to eat anything. My ma had about eaten all of her hot dog before she took any of the pop. I think she was sort of afraid to try her out. Anyway, she took the bull by the horns, so to speak. She took that Coke up and began to suck on it without letting any air in on the sides. She wasn't getting much, so she really began to draw on it hard. She pulled it from her mouth to get some air, and then is when it happened. The bottle had built up pressure from her sucking, so when she took it down, all of the Coke shot up her nose. She became strangled and started to cough, fart, sneeze, and pee all over herself. The fellow at the counter sort of just shook his head in wonderment. Good gosh almighty, Rose, what have you done to yourself? Paul shouted, because Ma wasn't in any condition to answer him or anybody else for that matter. We fell into wiping each other off the best we could and got back out in the street. It's funny. Paul said that he'd be damned how he could have wound up with such a crowd. Frankly, I would have been glad to be someplace besides there. Pa had us get back in the Gitney, and he said that we was going to the Burlington come hell or high water. So back on the road we got. This part of the road was paved, and we got down it at a pretty good clip. We came up on Burlington pretty fast after going through a place called Haw River. Pa had never driven in a place that had a traffic cop or turning signals or whatever. He was biling right down into the town without looking or listening. Pretty soon, all hell broke loose. A cop was waving his arms and blowing his whistle and motioning to us to pull over to the side. Pa did as he was ordered, and the police came up to us and looked the crowd over. Man, he says, where in the heck have y'all come from? Well, now, Captain, ain't no use to take on, so Pa said. I was just out to show my family the sights of the city. I ought to give you a ticket for attempting to drive, but the best thing I can say to you is to get this contraption the heck out of here and back home. Better still, you follow me. We followed the police out to the edge of town and out to the highway out of town. He pulled up and back to our car. Mister, he says, you're not for this part of the world without a lot of training, so my advice for you is to go back to where you came from, where the heck ever that is. I could see Pa was getting madder than all get out. I was afraid that Pa would climb on that police and get all of us in a lot of trouble. But me being of tender age and what I said didn't mean a darn thing anyways. When the cop pulled up away, it was getting sundown, and Pa lowed to Ma that we had better be getting on home because it was about milking time. Ma lowed that it was. Going back, Pa made a wrong turn and went to some place he didn't know where he was. A fellow finally set us back on the right path. By then it was darker than all get out. The light on the old T was magneto, and when you fired her up, she had bright lights, but the road was rough, so he had to slow her down a lot, and they just about went out. About the time we reached Hyco, the old car had biled out of water and was steaming. We have got to get some water, Pa says, and that's a fact. So he pulled on to the side of the road and went looking for some. We piled out of the pitch black and waited. Ma lowed that if the Lord ever let her get home, she weren't ever going on no more Model T rides. We all amened her. Don't you young'uns get too far from this Gitney, she said. You might get on a snake or whatever. We had waited a while and had all gone to the bathroom on the side of the road. Pretty soon we heard a commotion coming from up the road. Good gosh almighty, Ma hollered. You young'uns get out of the road. Here comes a man on a hoss at a full gallop. He will kill you for show. It turned out it was Pa with his hat full of water. He roared in like a bat out of hell, but he had forgotten to screw the cap off the tea when he left. So by the time he got the water in the tea, it was only about a cupful that biled out faster than he poured it in. If that don't beat all, Pa said, I think that there are powers working against me. Now I can believe that, Ma lowed. There's a fly in here. He had to make several more trips, but finally got her to going. We made home about 2 o'clock in the morning. We were all very happy to get there, and most of us said so in so many words. But Pa, he weren't whipped yet. He didn't make no promise. Ma said, Tom Clayton, let's get these young'uns to bed before it gets any later. And that is the first chapter of my dad's book. And I'll tell you a little something. When we were little, I was born in Ohio, and then when I was in about the third grade, I think we moved to New Mexico. And the first time my dad ever told me this story, I really never knew anything about my dad's life because, I was in third grade. I was really young. And he told us, we were all sitting in our house we were in the middle of the nowhere in New Mexico. I mean, our closest neighbor was about a mile or two down the road, and the next one was a little bit farther, and we were about, I think, 10 miles from a town. We had no telephone, and there was no computers or anything back then, so we were really out in the middle of nowhere. And I forget what was going on that day, if it was a Sunday or we were just taking it easy. And my dad told all of us this story for the very first time. And I'm telling you, we laughed and laughed, and we were rolling on the floor laughing so much because the way he wrote it was pretty much the way he told it. And being a little kid, I mean, it was just so funny to hear him and to know that this was a true story about his life. And so the rest of the book was a lot like that, and I was thinking maybe I can come on and read a chapter a day if they're not too long. I don't think they are. And so that's what I was thinking about doing. And you guys let me know if you wouldn't mind, let me know if that's something that you would like. I know there's a few words in there some of you may not like, but it's just the way they talked and the way it was back then. It was just life. And so anyway, I hope you guys are having a great day, and I'm going to sign off there. I will put a link if anyone's interested in this necklace and earring set. I'll put the link on this post, and I pray that everyone's doing well. I know there's several people, friends of mine, that are just going through some really hard times. I'm praying for them, and I know some others that I don't really know in person, but I hear they're going through hard times, and I'm worried about our country. It's just a scary time. Anyway, God's in control, though, and I can't believe that he's going to let evil win out. I hope not, anyway. So anyway, praying for you guys. I hope you guys have a great evening, and I will talk to you tomorrow with maybe chapter 2. I'll talk to you later, you guys. Bye-bye.